Welcome to the Global Discussion, a discussion with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. Today's no exception. You're in for a treat. We're joined by Lindley Gooden. Lindley, you're very welcome to the show. Let's begin, before we get into everything that we're going to talk about today. Let's ask you to maybe introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about who you are, a bit about your background and what you do, because we've got some great stuff to unpack. So over to you, Lindley.
Simon, what a pleasure. It's lovely to see you there, lovely to hear you there. Yes, I'm Lindley Gooden. Hello, everybody. I am, in terms of background, a jaded, reformed journalist. I was a journalist for a very long time in national TV and radio in the UK and other places too. And so I covered lots of stories, lots of UK, Europe, world stories, big ones, small ones. Sometimes the small ones are more fun. But then about 20 years ago, I set up Greenscreen, which is a content creation agency, factual. So basically what we do is help companies, very large companies often, to tell their stories, but in a way that engenders trust and has authenticity and really delivers something that people can attach themselves to, believe what you're saying. So that's what we do well. We're trust mongers. And we do that not by making up details about a business. We help them to explain their story in a way that you and I, consumers, the partners, can believe. So yes, that's been my checkered history. And before that, I was a theoretical physicist, but perhaps that's for another podcast.
Well, it's interesting because if you go back, I mean, from the University of Westminster, University of Warwick,
Yep.
spell over in Cardiff, and of course you mentioned your spell in, well, a senior journalist
Yeah.
at the at the BBC, you
Yeah.
know, ITN, be a program familiar with lots of people, radio
Mm.
head of news. I mean, there's a lot of
Yeah.
um, really top level journalism expertise there, both in TV and radio.
You
Um,
say that, of course, the job itself isn't always as top level as you might think. It's one of the most important jobs I think that we have when
yeah,
it's done well, but it can also be done badly. And of course, we'll talk about this book in a bit, but really, I believed in listening to people and to learning what they have to say and explaining that to people who
yeah,
need the information. And that's the basic function of reporting. And
yeah,
yes, I ended up being senior in terms of grade, but you know, a good journalist, and I think I became one just before I left. There are
right.
reasons for that. But I think the best journalists are ones that listen and translate and also really reflect the balance of any story. And that's what I believe. And I think a lot of journalists out there still do believe that. Unfortunately, it's very difficult in the maelstrom of information to get that right and to listen for long enough and relay that in a way that we can understand.
Yeah, no, you make a great point. And like we've kind of jumped already from theoretical physics to senior journalism
I know.
into what you do now with green screen. We were
Yeah.
talking just before we hit the camera and hit the
Mm.
record buttons that you've got the best job title I've come across in a long time, Cheerleader-in-Chief over at Greenscreen.
Yeah.
But you mentioned the book, right? And I want to get straight
Mm.
into it because
Sure.
you're talking about balanced storytelling.
Yeah.
You're talking about listening and translating. And your book, The Future of Truth, couldn't come at a more important time in that story arc, if I can say that. So
Yeah.
could you unpack that for us and tell us
Yeah.
why this is such an important piece?
It's important because it affects us all. If you're on social media, if you have an account, if you take your news, as so many young people do, more than conventional news now, some people take their news from social media. Now, look, I would say that we're at this point where we're crunching against each other. Our opinions are forcing us so far apart um, that I actually, although this is very important to me, and I assumed as a good journalist, a good correspondent, that it was natural to tell the story and give the facts in a understandable way and be professional about it. But of course, we are in such a different world to the one that I worked in as a journo. What we have now, as you know, as everybody listening to this knows in their own lives, it's very difficult to know where our information is coming from. It's very difficult to separate facts from fiction. And it's difficult to know what to do with it. And that's why things like conspiracy lands open up and why we bash against each other in the comments section of any YouTube video. How do we get around this? How do we understand where our information is coming from, but mainly how do we spot disinformation and misinformation in real time? That's one of the banners I put with this thing. The book is called The Future of Truth and How to Get There, because how to get there is probably the most important thing we can do. It's a grandiose title to say, hey, I know read on, I know the future of truth, but no, how to get there is the most important thing. So if I unpack it very, very briefly, it's about each of us. How can we individually, instinctively, because we have the instincts, unpack the facts, extract the facts from a story, see the truth, in British parlance, see the wood for the trees? How can we take that stuff out and then act on the good stuff? There is a lot in there. And quite honestly, one of the most important things that we can all understand, I'll leave this with you for a second, is our emotions. If you feel really, really strongly, that can't live in your brain in a neuroscience way. It can't live in your brain. The emotion, the chimp brain, as I call it, can't live in you at the same time as your working out human brain that does the maths. So how do we start to unpack information? Firstly, lower the emotion. Stop, step back, and sidestep. I've got a catchphrase. I'll use it. Stop, step back, and sidestep. So that's step one. We'll go into the next bit, I'm sure, Simon. But yeah, well, what about you? I mean, I'm interested in you as well, because I'm also an interviewer. What do you see in your daily life? Because I think if we can open up a conversation between all of us, we're heading in the right direction.
No, it's a great point. And look, the book, The Future of Truth and How to Get There, as you say,
Mm,
I don't think could have come at a better time, because
yeah,
at the time of recording, we've got people voting in the
yeah,
US, thinking about the election cycle.
yeah.
I've lost count of how many prime ministers we've been through in the UK, for example.
I think five.
And misinformation, disinformation, and how we found ourselves in this, dare I say, algorithmic induced.
Yeah,
You're not really in control even of what's being fed to you anymore. It's
no.
kind of served up to you in a lot of senses. And I think, from a personal perspective, I think it's such a hard task,
Mm,
to actually get to what is truth. You've got senior politicians around the world using terms like fake news.
yeah,
You've got people getting caught up into this echo chamber of the internet, where
mm,
if you put enough of what you believe out there, you'll get enough positive reinforcement that actually you're on the right track, when actually you
yeah.
could be a million miles away from the truth. Um, so it's a fascinating topic. So maybe share a little bit more about your thoughts on that, Lindley.
Yeah, will do. I'm going to run you through. I don't want to spoil the ending of this thing, but I did a lot of thinking and I asked myself a lot of questions to get to the point where I think in quite a large way I've managed to piece together the journey that we can all take to get to the bottom of it. And actually, it's very, very quick and instinctive, right? So first of all, let's do it in the real world. You see a piece of information that taps into something you already believe, a core belief, and it makes you angry. What do? You want to protect your loved ones. You want to be part of the conversation. You share it. You shout about it. You tell your friends and family about it because you should know this too. This is nothing new. That's exactly how humans' brains have worked for 30,000 years plus. There's a threat in the village next to you or the settlement next to you. Somebody comes to your campfire and says, there's a problem in the village next to us. Act, defend, and so on. So what a story does when it's manipulated or created to have very salacious language, to tap into things like, oh, small boats or immigration or one of those big issues, the wedge issues. What it does, it creates a threat. And stories, and there's research in the book, stories are incredibly effective. In fact, the most effective way to spread fear and to spread a threat. Disinformation and misinformation are often negative. So you spread a threat, we go fight, fright, and flight. I put a fright in the middle because fright is very important. It's the best mechanism. Fight, fright, and flight. Talk about it. And then what happens? The next layer up, your identity, your voice, your presence online, often online, becomes associated. You become bigger. You become a fighter for what's right. So it expands from there. What we have to do, what we all have to do in our own lives, especially if we have a loved one or a friend or a colleague who's fallen down a rabbit hole, fallen to the dark side, is doom scrolling, is talking about an issue in the world in one way, not the other, importantly, just one simple way, what we need to do is open up a conversation. So if you can see what I'm delivering there, hopefully it's just threat means response, often negative. Often then you start to share these stories and you become part of that community. Your identity, your voice is wrapped up into that, and it gets more and more extreme until, there's some kind of intervention or you suddenly snap out of it. But that doesn't happen very easily because our emotions are charged. And that's the basic process. It's so human. It's always been the way. It's happened for millennia. There are a few examples, and one in particular, which I won't tell you now because it is complicated. This has happened before. The witch trials were all about this. And the printing press was the social media of the time. Once you get into that cycle, our human brains spread the threat. But actually, what we need to do is to work out in our own lives how to spot that in real time, which effectively is two things. Emotion, calm that emotion down slightly. Just look at it. Hold back 30% of your disbelief in a story. Don't just trust it because somebody you trust said it. That's not the way it works anymore. Look at your core beliefs, audit those. And that could be something like, let's say it's something like, I don't like immigration, therefore anyone who talks about immigration in negative terms, well, yes, that's right, I'm with them. That's the mechanism. So we have to calm that down and absolutely look at balance. One side does not fit all. You need to look at the other side and understand that there's some bias in there somewhere. It's complicated, it's in there, but of course, in our time together, it's kind of, how do we simplify it? Look at the threat, look at the emotion.
I love what you've said there, and it really resonates because I'm going to use an example of corporate messaging, business messaging.
Yeah,
There's a huge push on storytelling, engaging with customers,
that's
consumers,
right.
engaging with their B2B or B2C audiences.
That's right.
And they want the content, they want their story to resonate.
Yeah,
And emotion is very much part of that.
yeah,
And then I was reading a paper recently where it was saying that the emotional side of storytelling only gets you so far. It's an immediate burst that sort
yes.
of resonates with the human, but actually in the medium to longer term, it's getting to the facts and having the genuine conversations, not
Mm.
without the emotions. And you're kind of separating two things there to some degree
Yeah, yeah,
between the storytelling and the emotions. Now, when you started talking about storytelling, my mind automatically went to cave paintings,
yeah,
going back to that time where humans, and you were talking about, the next village over and small
mm,
gatherings and groups of
yeah,
existence, where stories were the way of passing information. We've seen it throughout the world. But you're
absolutely.
separating that emotional sort of rabbit hole, if I can,
Yeah,
from
yeah,
actually there are two sides to every story there. And it's an interesting sort of
yeah.
piece that, and it really stops you in your tracks when you start to consider that and what a
Yeah,
role emotion plays.
I've spoken to people who've read the book or listened to it. It's an audiobook as well, and they've said, I've just stopped sharing a little bit more than I sharing less than I used to do. I said, that's fantastic. That's great. If 1 out of 10 shares of something you didn't fully check out is gone, you've already reduced the cyclic effects of that stuff that swirls around us. There's a really interesting bit of research, which is old now in some ways. It's 7 years old as we record this, 2017. MIT put a study together, and it was Twitter at the time, of Twitter users. I think it was 3 million user accounts. And they looked at how fast false news, false information spreads compared to the real stuff. And it's almost twice as fast because actually a real story isn't that satisfying to our emotions. It's not that interesting. It's just factual. And I've said a few times in the book, I'm sorry, facts, but facts are boring. We want the spice, we want the intrigue and the gossip. We want something to talk about with people, especially with social media. So, but you have to strip it back. And the reason that works for me, as somebody who used to be in journalism, is because I used to have to check this stuff out. And I used to have to just hold back a bit. Even if that person seems really authentic and really genuine, you've still got to listen to the other side of the story just a little bit. Otherwise, you don't get all the facts. And it is not exciting to say that. And I know people listening to us are going, well, it's too much hassle. I like having a good gossip. Yes, absolutely. So a phrase that I only mentioned once in the book, but I'm going to mention it now and probably a few times, is hug your inner chimp. Hug your chimp. Your emotions and your enjoyment and excitement within a story are there for a reason. That is it's a social element, and that's what social media is all about. But it's also got us into a lot of trouble. We are fighting because of the vehicle that social media gives us to take sides. So really, in many ways, if we could all just remember the very instinctive elements of what we do, and we're not very good at spotting liars, but if you meet somebody in the street and they just look a bit shifty, there's something in their mannerism, there's something in what they're saying, or they're selling you something on the doorstep. That's if we can just encapsulate that, you're on the way to being a really good functioning human being using your brain, not just the base of the skull, which is where the chimp brain lives. So, but it is, I've got to say, it's really amazing. I didn't know when I started writing this thing. I wasn't even writing a book originally. I was just writing a commercial communications Bible again, like I do every Christmas around my house. Simon, seriously, you'll enjoy it. But yes, but when the longer you spend, especially with somebody like me who is a consumer correspondent, the longer you spend thinking about how do we take this information in, the further down that route you go. And when you realize that this is perfectly natural, we all have it, but we can control the supply. If you choose to, you can control the supply. And sharing less would be one of those ways to do it.
Yeah.
Just turn it down a bit. You turn it down a bit, yes, it might feel boring, but it's going to be great for your mental health. It's going to be great for the amount you're online. The channels won't like it because you'll be engaged less. But wouldn't it be great if we all had a choice? And I think we do. It just takes a bit of work.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, we're again at the time of recording, I'm a couple of hundred episodes, these video
Mm,
and audio episodes of the global discussion. We did 400 written
yeah.
sort of interviews with people before we even kicked this off.
Wow.
But I mean, with you mentioned there being a consumer, and a
Mm,
technology and a finance correspondent. I know we
yeah.
talked about the BBC, but also ITV and Sky News,
Yeah.
very big news organizations.
Mm,
And you've interviewed over 50,000 people at this stage, probably a lot more.
yeah. It could be a lot more. I
Yeah.
lost count. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've been able to tap into that. And you said something a moment ago that I want to come back to, which is,
Mm,
checking your facts and having
yeah.
a couple of sources and also having the opposite side of the argument in a news article used to be something that was sort of cherished.
It was.
Um, and now, of course, we have news outlets that lean this way very strongly and news outlets that lean that
Yeah.
way very
Yeah.
strongly, as opposed to providing, well, here's both sides of that argument and letting
Mm,
the reader maybe intellectually engage with that because
yeah.
it's a bit more authentic, a bit more clear,
Yeah.
and has less of that bias built into it. But
Yeah.
and the question I'm coming to is, we're now in the world of AI, right?
Mm,
Content is being produced by machines now, never mind us humans.
yeah. Yeah.
Um, so is it just going to get a lot worse before it gets better? Where are you at on that?
Yeah, I think it could go as far as it wants to go if we don't switch onto it, if we don't actually just do something ourselves. It is going to be, unfortunately, there are lots of companies out there doing some amazing work to look at fraud, to look at, in financial services, for example, companies who are building using Gen AI to build a million personas of a driving license so that they can spot the fakery in action. It's fascinating. It's really good stuff. I've seen under the bonnet of those things. They're really good, but they still won't stop it happening to us. You can right now receive a call from your son or daughter or friend or mum in tears asking for money. It's happening right now. It's happening a lot right now. So what do we do? There is a deepfake test in the book. There are lots of other things. There's a conspiracy equation, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. There's some interesting stuff, and I've tried to exercise all of our brains a little bit. But fundamentally, you've heard of uncanny valley. Uncanny valley is that feeling with AI where it's kind of what it says on the tin, really. If you go, ugh, ugh, that doesn't feel right, that is your gut instinct. And that can work with information. It should work with information. If it's one way or the other, use your gut instinct. But we have to develop it slightly because we are trusting a lot. So what do? Sources, you look at who's sending the information. It might come through a friend. That seems like a trusted source. but actually that's not a primary source. So we've got four types of sources. I'm going to run through them really quickly. The first thing all of us could do right now, next time we read anything online, is just think, where did it come from? Where did that come from? So primary sources, they were in the room when that secret conspiracy was hatched. They were there at the scene of that news story. Now, they might be biased, but primary sources are your patient zero for the story. Any good journalist will go both sides. Like you said, they'll go both sides. You'll start to get balance. Now, it doesn't always work because sometimes journalists go 100%, 50% for that side, 50% for that side. That may not reflect what's really happening. That might, and that's perhaps, I would argue, what happened with Brexit in the UK. Equal coverage was given to an economist who was a very small voice in the pack. Most would say it's not going to be great for us. One would say, oh, yeah, it's great. That's not balance. That's why you need more than one in the right proportions. So look at your sources. Primary, secondary is good reporting. That's the stuff that hopefully a lot of journalists are still doing, which is, yeah, balanced. You can find it in different places. There's a couple of tables which might be useful for UK and US readers and listeners in the book, which is it kind of separated out right, left, middle. Who are the channels and who are they owned by? I don't reflect on who those people, what their politics is, but you can guess if you read those things. Tertiary is opinions. It's kind of analysis of reporting, of that good reporting. It's biased reporting. If one newspaper or one website or one social channel is on one side of any argument, that's biased. That's tertiary. Now, what does social media give us? I phrase it like this. If primary is the source or the facts, secondary is reporting, proper reporting, tertiary is opinions, then social media from individuals is normally opinions of reporting of the original facts. If you can look at that and go, oh yeah, actually, the things that I'm trusting from my friends and my loved ones is actually just their opinions about opinions of something they saw and not the original facts. Now that I had to look up the term, it's quaternary, fourth-hand sources. And until you go to that point, you think, okay, yes, I see. Maybe everything I'm spreading isn't as reliable as I thought it was.
That's a real penny drop moment, isn't it, for people?
Yeah,
That's the, oh yeah, I get it now. That there's a
you
real
know, of
moment there.
course, I
Mm.
didn't realize it. You didn't realize it, but it's fourth-hand reporting. It's opinions of opinions. Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible when you put it in that context, Lindley. Um, I want to ask you a related question, if I can, about
Mm,
when I think about the generation up from me.
yeah.
They've moved to smartphones reluctantly from button phones. Um, they, I, I'm generalizing, and I shouldn't do that, I know, but in a lot of
You're among
cases,
friends, Simon. You're
people a
among
lot
friends.
older than I am
Yeah.
um, are really struggling to spot fakes. They're getting duped. They're getting
Yeah.
frauded. They're
Yeah.
getting texts and calls. And this is a generation who would open the door to see who's there. You know,
Yeah.
hello, how are you? How can I help
That's
you?
right.
And it's very difficult. If I go down a generation or two, they seem to be a lot more digitally native because they've grown up with this stuff. They can swipe
Absolutely.
screens of glass faster than anybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
But do you think, my question is this, do you think that we're having to level up to be able to spot this? You know, coming back to that
Yeah.
human instinct, you kind of get a sense of when something's off. And I think
Mm,
some people, if you've been in the technology space like I have, and certainly if with your background
yeah.
expertise, your sort of radar's on, you know, you can spot this
Yeah.
stuff.
That's right.
You're
Yeah.
better at it than others. But again, I'm generalizing, but my fear is that there's a great percentage of the population that this stuff it's just hidden from them. And the platforms that we're on,
Yeah.
and there's been documentation and reports on this from the founders themselves, they were built to hold you in there. They were built for
That's right.
dopamine hits. They were built
That's right.
for all this. It's not a level playing field, and people are at very different levels of being able to spot this stuff. And of course, the machinery behind it, the technology, the
Mm,
large language models, the artificial intelligence of where we're
yeah.
at today makes it even harder, I think, you know, when you look at videos, for example, you know.
Absolutely. So but there needs to be, and there are, thankfully, in this thing, there are simple things to just, again, penny drop moments where you go, when you can think, okay, right, I can see that now. And one of them might be this. Rather, you're right. Probably, I mean, lots of research into conspiracy beliefs shows that around about a third of any population, wherever they are in the world, around about a third, sometimes less, sometimes more, kind of believe in that conspiracy. It kind of doesn't matter what the conspiracy is. It's always around about a third. 10% fully believe, 20% kind of believe. There's a gray area in the middle, and then around 50% don't believe. But it's pretty heavily weighted, right? But if those of us who catch on to this and think, oh, yeah, I'm tired of this, I'm tired of being lied to. In fact, the book starts with one line, which is, none of us really want to be lied to, do we? Why? We don't want, none of us want to be lied to. That's something we all hold in common. If you want to find the truth, and I kind of defined it at the end, although I do earlier on say there is no truth, face it, but you can find the truth if you cut out opinions. You can start to get towards a truth. But look, I would say those of us who are early adopters and start to see this stuff and think, I can cut out some of my information. Wouldn't it be lovely if those people who do trust you, the people who you might share to next, if you say, I'm leaving this forum, or I'm going to just stop sharing quite so much, one person could then affect 2 people, could affect 4 people, could affect 8 people. You know, we all do have to say this if we believe that we're being lied to, if we believe, and I think most of us in some ways do believe that. People who believe in conspiracy beliefs, they believe they're being lied to, but they're just pointing at the wrong people a lot of the time. So I think it's up to us, a little army of people who are fed up with this, who can then spread to their friends and loved ones. Yes, I'm moving. I'm going to just try and improve my diet a bit. I think that would do a lot of good. Just
Yeah,
if I
and
mean,
I wanted
because
to bring that
it is
up if I
hard.
can,
Yeah,
Lindy, because you mentioned, the information diet,
yeah,
that's what you're referring to.
yeah.
And there's an onus on all of us, isn't there, to sort of clean up our information diet, to really think about what information we let in and how we vet that information.
It'll do us a lot of good, Simon. I'm not sure that
Yeah,
for most of us we really want to. You know, that's the thing. This is not
right.
homework. This is not meant to be lines. It's actually just, well, I think a lot of us would be happier if we didn't take so much of this negative stuff in. I try to avoid it. I still take it in, but I maybe got a high bar for it, and I can push out the stuff I just don't really feel is correct. I do spit out my breakfast many mornings, and I shout at the radio because I know they've left out a big detail. It's just one-sided. But little steps will take us a long way. And little steps, like reducing emotion, like looking at your core beliefs, they might well be well justified, you know, but actually, as long as you know what you believe and you know what stories are working on you, which ones can be created in a newspaper, for example, to tap into people like you, if you know, you're engaging your human brain a bit. And look, as somebody who's, yes, storytelling is an overused word. It's on my company website. It's on every company website in the creative services. That's the way it works. But the power of stories really is to make us act. It brought us together. It shared ideas. They still do. But when you have a vehicle like social media, same with the printing press way back when in the 14th century, 15th century, it allows niche ideas to explode. So if we can just take one step back and understand kind of who we are, and just understand that maybe that's not a true piece of information, particularly with AI and deepfakes, we're actually doing ourselves a lot of good. And it's really exciting when you realize that you have the power to identify the what, when, where, who, and maybe even the why of a story. Once you realize you can actually pick that apart and not believe all the sort of salacious language and the hatred, it's really empowering. And actually, I've got to say, that's the exciting bit, because you think, okay, my information diet is starting to clean up a bit. It's really good.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. It's great to hear that. I want to ask you if I can as well, because we're talking a little bit about the book, and I'll come back to the book in a moment. But
Mhm.
for people watching or listening to our discussion today, almost 2 decades now, you've been the founder of something called Greenscreen, which is very
Yeah,
heavily involved in the video. And,
yeah,
whether it is Cancer Research UK or Legoland or,
yeah,
big brands there, you're kind of doing a lot of work. And obviously, this is very topical and
mm,
very
yeah,
important to brands because you were just talking about brands there. And
yeah, yeah, yeah,
D is this very much at the core of what you're doing over at Greenscreen? Is it in the conversations you're having with these brands? Because
yeah,
brands wanna get the message out there, they kinda, to some degree, buy into the fact that we just love a story.
yeah. That's right.
How does that work when you're sort of walking both sides of that,
Yeah.
area?
Well, in some ways, you can walk the same side. You can walk the correct side if you really work at it. So what what we do is we add the creative touch. We actually sort of just bring the energy out of a genuine story. So you can be really authentic. And actually, a lot of stuff that we do in the factual side, I wish it was the same in advertising. It's not the way advertising works. You are trying to engage emotions, but genuinely through people. So in the fact in our side, so we work with very large companies. We've done the recruitment videos for a very large train operator in the UK. What did I do? I took each video, each social media, and each main video has one person. And you know what? I got to know them on camera and get them laughing, get them enjoying, tell us what they really care about. That's the way stories can be positive and true, as well as being a great sales pitch. Because actually, essentially, that's what we try to get out of social media. We try to get a real connection with people. It's very difficult when you're physically separated, but actually very intimate in terms of what you're talking about. So yeah, you can do both. I would say the future of Greenscreen will be to continue with that work, but actually bring in some of this as well. I think what in the conversations I've been having with nearly every client, and they've all bought a copy of the book, give or take. They did, and the dad sees it on the coffee table and goes, "What's this colourful object?" and just wolfs it down. So interestingly, two things: the different ages they seem to be getting into it. It's slow, but it'll happen. It's just I'm doing it very organically through kind people like yourself. Just let's talk about this stuff. Um, but then also the clients are saying, I really care about this in my own life. So I think what's going to happen in terms of business, and I've been asked about this, how does this relate to business? Well, I think it relates to your people. We're all feeling this. We're all feeling a little bit downtrodden by the information we receive and that we see people sharing. So in your personal life, but if you tread something nasty off social media into your office, you might make different decisions about where the business goes or what your work is or how you interact with other people who don't believe the same thing as you. So in terms of culture, Simon, this is a biggie, but it hasn't quite translated over yet. This is very early stages. Very few people from what I've looked at, and I tried not to read other people's work while I was doing this thing because that would just distract me. I don't see that many people have done this before. So they haven't really made it sort of a practical guide. And there are toolkits at the end of every single chapter to really try to crack the nut in a way that you can understand. So we're early stages, but I really believe in it. I do think that's, I mean, certainly for me personally, it's been amazing. I've learned so much. I did not know this stuff. I'd assumed it. I didn't know the way our brains work and how this stuff works on us, how effective it is. Probably a lot of algorithms are based on this stuff, but we don't know because they're not open to us.
Yeah, they're black box, aren't they? And in a lot of
They are
cases,
indeed.
and as you say, we're at 4 times opinions removed from the actual
That's
source
right.
in a lot of occasions. And I think it comes back to those words that you've used, which is that authentic story, the authenticity, the
Yeah.
clarity.
It's
Um, you
real. It's
know,
energetic. It can be really
yeah,
positive. It can also be very negative. I've been a big fan. Yeah, partly because I was a journalist for a long time. I need to hear the bad stuff too. Even when I'm working with a brand that wants to talk about itself and talk positively about itself, we often start with the negative stuff because if you do not deal with that, that's what your audience is thinking. You've got to deal with that stuff and then turn that frown upside down. Without that context, you do not have the full story.
yeah, yeah. And I think, if I scratch just beneath the surface a tiny bit, I
Yeah.
kind of think that most people feel something's wrong, something's off here. I
Yeah.
don't quite have the the light to shine me through, but this is not going to end well. There's a lot of people that feel
Yeah,
like that, but they're addicted to it to some degree. Maybe
yeah.
not the right word, but in a lot of cases, there is a lot of that digital addiction going on.
Mm.
If I was to ask you then, so if somebody's, without going out and buying the book, of course, we're going to recommend people go out and buy the book, but the book aside, if you were to start giving people advice about cleaning up their information diet, to
Yeah,
focusing on what's authentic, where the clarity lies,
yeah.
what's the best advice you'd share with people?
Yeah, I think we're going to wrap around to a couple of things that I mentioned earlier. So that little checklist earlier on was, first of all, use your emotion differently. When a story makes you angry or outraged, just stand back for a second and look at it. If it's made your adrenaline fly or your cortisol, you really feel heightened, angry, emotional, maybe even excited. But if you feel so strongly that it's made your heart skip a beat, hold on for a second, a split second, just go, okay, that might or might not be true. It might well be, but just give it a second. And what you've done then is you allowed your frontal cortex to take over and your human starting to think about the thing. Now, that's number one. Use your emotions differently. Don't let them manipulate you. Just watch what your emotions doing and spot it. And then next up, look, it doesn't hurt to have a little audit of your core beliefs. Just understand where you're coming from. What do you believe in? You could do a little list of 5 things, 5 big stories that really rile you up. I'm holding up 4 fingers. I apologize. My maths used to be quite good. So yeah, 5 things. And what do you really believe? Wouldn't that be interesting? Because I think what you might find if you relate it to the stories that you kind of really, really like, or the ones that really hit your timeline because you've already been clicking on those links, you might find you've got 5 big beliefs. One of the big ones in the UK, it's true in many countries at the moment, especially with the rise of nationalist right-wing politics, which, you know, I have my own beliefs about, some which I didn't put in the book, because this is about all of us, so that we can all, whatever side of the argument we're on, understand what's going on. There are certain things that will appeal to the right, if you like, the nationalists, the people who believe in individuality, and there are certain things that will appeal to the left. And that's just political, but we can come together. So I would say that these are the first 2 things: emotions, core beliefs. Check yourself out. And it doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means that you're sucking in certain amounts of information and believing it when it doesn't necessarily make sense.
I love that. Thank you. And as you say, it starts with these kind of conversations, right? And I'm glad that we're having this conversation
Yeah.
because, in some small way, the global discussion can help spread this
Mm,
message, spread this
yeah.
information, get people to focus on the book and the great work that you're doing. But I do want to mention, with my little marketeer's hat on,
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about street talks because what you were saying there when you talk
Yeah.
about if we're going to come back together, which I know is a line that you use around the truth, we need to talk. And that's exactly what we're doing here today.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
thought street talks was such a smart, clever, almost vox poppy type of thing to do. You must have had a bit
Yeah.
of fun doing that.
Yeah, it's very early stages. So I run a business, as you know, and I'm busy. So currently I'm in an undisclosed bedroom in the Midlands, heading to a filming day with the Open University tomorrow. So it's busy. But one of the most important things, as you say, we can do is talk, right? That's kind of the fundamental bit of it. It's on the back cover. It's all the way through the book. We need to talk. So I used to be a journalist. I can go out with a microphone, weird though it is these days, 20 years later, and talk to ordinary people. And what the first street talks that I did, I went around a very large train station in London and asked people, random people on the street, look, what do you think about disinformation? Do you care? Yes, I care, right? Where do you get yours from? I have a number of sources, but I choose these ones. And so what we did, we had a really good set of chats. And what I found, and this is brilliant, what I found talking to a lot of people, some who I think probably were skeptical of any questioning of their timeline, any questioning of their social media use. One or two, they said, "Yeah, I think I'm okay." But clearly, you get the impression that maybe they just love what the activity. What I got, I think it was fantastic, was most people in their own way already knew. And that's the point of this thing. Yes, I've written a book, and yes, we're talking about it, and there is a lot to talk about, and we are down the rabbit hole too far for anyone's comfort. but we do have the tools. We just need to be reminded that you can take very simple steps and it makes such a wild difference to you. You won't believe how just a little bit of skepticism of your favorite influencer in what they say and what they promote, that little bit could change your perspective quite a long way. So, there are lots of tools, there are lots of tricks. I throw everything at this and we apply all those little tricks to news, to media. We do it to AI and deep fakes. Once you've got the key, the principles, you can start to apply it all over the place and you start to see the cracks. And it's really interesting. So, but I think those little steps, and Street Talks is part of that. I will be doing a lot more. I really want to get out there and talk to people. And actually, I'm talking to event organizers as well to try and do some of that stuff. Let's talk about it. Let's hear the stories. Let's hear the beliefs, and let's try to make some positive change. It is up to. Sadly, it's we're the information guardians at the end of the day. So we've got to do a little
Yeah,
bit of work
thanks for
ourselves.
sharing
But it
that
could be fun.
advice. Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you for sharing that advice. Now, look, obviously, in between running your company, writing this fantastic book, The Future of Truth, there's an awful lot that you're involved in.
yeah,
And I'm interested, and I like to ask all my guests a few questions before we wrap up. And one is
yeah,
about how does planning work in their world? What does the next 6 to 12 months look like?
yeah,
What's on your horizon? What are you hoping to achieve? I'm assuming getting out there and spreading the word
yeah.
of the future truth. How do we get to the future truth? But what does the next 6 to 12 months look like for you? How does that work in your world?
Yeah, look, I've spent my entire career helping other people to tell their stories, right? This is the first time I've actually had one of my own. So I'm looking forward to taking that on. It's a really daunting prospect. This is interesting. It's really quite a challenge to come out from behind green screen and start to offer advice on things that I've been doing, that I know quite a lot about. You don't often hear this stuff. So that's my plan really at the moment. Green screen is very successful, got lovely loyal clients, very large companies who come back to me because they trust me. So I bring in my guys and it's fantastic. Green screen will continue. What I'd like to do is to make information ethics a bit more of a thing. And so running in parallel with Greenscreen, which is, it makes huge amounts of video for clients. We train them to speak. We do all the stuff that you might think other creative agencies would do, but we do it with trust in mind at all times and authenticity in mind at all times. It really works. So in parallel, the future of truth and how to get there is a little tip of the iceberg, which I'm hoping will actually do some good. I really hope that people will take a little solace from the fact that they're not alone, that there are really simple techniques that can make a big difference in your life. In some ways, it's a self-help book in that way. It's not meant to be. It's supposed to lift the lid, Wizard of Oz style, just to see this is how it really works on us, on all of us, not just you, not just a conspiracy believer, all of us. So yeah, they'll run in parallel, and but I do want to go and start talking to businesses. I've been asked by a few to talk to them. Schools have asked me in to talk to them as well. Quite high-profile schools. And so I think what I want to do is set those information guardians going. Let's plant a few seeds, and then that will feed into the nature of what Greenscreen does because it's all really positive. I'm really excited. It's quite daunting. It's a challenge, but yeah, Simon, that's my plan.
Yeah.
It's not written down on paper anywhere, but it's at the front of my mind.
Well, thank you for sharing that. It's fascinating. I'm really enjoying our discussion today,
Mm,
talking about information ethics and the future of truth. I mean,
yeah,
there's no more important topic, really, I think, at this
yeah,
moment in time. It's particularly with AI, particularly with everything that's going on in the world and the disinformation that's out there.
yeah, yeah.
It's a really big mountain to climb, but I'm glad you're championing that cause. So
Mm.
thank you. Before I do wrap up, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you'd like to bring into this conversation, or are there any sort of parting thoughts you'd like to build on some of the things we've talked about that we can leave people with before we wrap up?
We can do it. We can do it really quickly. We do have to choose to, but I'm really excited. I think there's a lot of good stuff that's come out of this. And Street Talks is one of those things. Just literally going to talk to people, and everyone has the answers. It's just a case of sticking to it. I would like to speak, and I want people to, if you want to speak about this issue, if you want to speak to your troops about this issue, get in touch. I'm very keen to do it. I have no problem barefaced saying that to you, Simon, because this is how we start the journey. I think we all need it. And if we don't make a change and start to really put a much more positive spin on what we're seeing, hearing, and reading, we head further into this maze, and AI deepfakes are already making that far more difficult to spot. So yeah, let's get the ball rolling. Let's start talking. You've kindly invited me onto this today, and I'm very happy to talk about it clearly. But we do need to do some work. So let's step in the right direction and see what we can make out of it.
Perfect. And finally, if people want to find out more about your work at Greenscreen, get in
Yeah,
touch with you so you can come and talk about this topic, or go out and
yeah,
buy the book, where's the
yeah.
best place to point people to?
Yeah, my name is uniquely spelt, Lindley. If you go look for Lindley Gooden, you'll find me anywhere. There's a personal website, there's thefutureoftruth.info, and there's greenscreen.london. So you will never be far from me if you go and find one of those channels. Have a little browse, see what you think. And, by all means, buy this thing. But the most important thing is the how to get there. And the how to get there depends on us all making a change. So let's get on with the how.
Well, that brings us nicely to the end of our time today here on the Global Discussion. Before I wrap up, I want to thank everybody who's watching or listening to this really important conversation today. Make sure that you follow, like, subscribe, do all the stuff I need you to do to help support the show. Go and check out everything that Lindley's involved in. Go out and grab a copy of the book, The Future of Truth, and How to Get There. Really important. Such an important conversation. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show today. And I want to invite people back, where I'll be having some more discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers just like Lindley. But thanks, Lindley. It's been great to talk to you again today.
You too, Simon. What a lovely treat. And thanks for the time. Nice to meet you.
Thank you.